Before the words could finish, a sharp spear tip came crashing down from above. It was a vertical thrust. Rem pushed off the ground. As he quickly dodged to the side, the spear followed as if it had eyes. It changed direction in mid-air at will.
A homing weapon.
There was no time to question it. Rem swung his axe. With the axe in his right hand, he struck the spear shaft, and with the left axe he turned it to block the spear tip with its broad side. Thunk crack! It was a half success, half failure. He blocked the spear tip, but his cracked rib had now broken. On the other hand, he had managed to break the spear shaft, so it was half a success.
I've been fooled.
It wasn't a homing weapon. A homing weapon was like a relic that came from the West. Of course, it was a completely different weapon from what was referred to as relics on this continent. There was no way a homing weapon would break this easily. He had deliberately struck it, thinking it was a homing weapon. The plan was to sever the connection with this blow. A homing weapon necessarily required a connection with its owner.
Not bad.
The word Enkrid was left unspoken. A Westerner appeared in Rem's sight.
What are you?
Rem asked, bewildered. He could feel it from just that one strike.
Strong.
Power, speed, and even the technique aimed at the opponent. All of it was outstanding. It was far beyond the level of an ordinary mercenary.
What are you asking on a battlefield where it's kill or be killed?
The opponent replied, tapping his shoulder lightly with his unique throwing spear. His demeanor was full of confidence. His appearance was distinctive. A leather breastplate covering his chest, leather guards from his shins to his thighs, and similar guards covering his hands up to his shoulders. It was as if his entire body was covered in leather. His hair was grayish, with half of his face full of wrinkles, and the other half as smooth as a child's. It was an unnatural-looking face. He let go of the spear he had been tapping on his shoulder. Instead of falling to the ground, the spear stopped at his knee level and floated in mid-air.
What kind of trick is this?
What was that?
A technique.
It wasn't a spell or sorcery. No, it did feel a sorcery, but there was no magical energy coming from the spear itself. So, it wasn't a homing weapon, yet it floated in mid-air on its own. Since it wouldn't do any good to show weakness, Rem subtly raised his left arm to cover his side. Pain followed, but if he couldn't endure this much, he would have died a long time ago.
Let's do this the easy way. Where to? Home? Why? Are you going to give me something?
Rem, out of habit, moved his mouth while looking for an opening. Every time he was about to throw his axe, the opponent shifted his stance. Above all, the floating spear was annoying. It floated within a certain radius of the opponent's body, and it wouldn't have been surprising if it suddenly flew at him.
Where did this thing suddenly come from?
A moment ago, his rib had been cracked because of 3 wolf beasts. Even though it looked like an easy fight, it had been a brutal battle. The wolf bishop of the cult had been so furious over the loss of his beasts that he had almost exploded, but the beasts weren't the real problem.
I'll pull out your tongue.
Before the words were finished, the spear came flying at him. It wasn't his right hand that threw it from the front of his right knee. It was his left hand, which he had subtly moved behind his back. Rem visualized the spear's trajectory in his mind. He swung his axe. It was the kind of axe swing that Enkrid often described as resembling a ray of light. As a loud crash rang out and one spear was deflected, Rem felt a shock that made his hand tingle. Immediately after, the floating spear also came flying at him. Using a non-homing weapon like this? There was no time to figure out the answer. Rem kept swinging his axe. Thud, 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 thud. As the spear blade met the axe blade, red sparks erupted in the air, creating bursts of heat as embers flew. Whether he had forgotten the cold or not, sweat began to flow down his entire body. The warmth from the heating stone tucked in his chest pocket started to bother him. Thud, 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 thud. Even amidst the clash, the spear repeatedly retreated and thrust forward again. No matter how many times he deflected it, it would return and come flying at him once more. By the time Rem had blocked the spear about 80 times, he stomped his left foot, shattering a rock embedded in the ground. With a crack, the shattered pieces flew forward. A thick chunk of stone came between them. The spear tip pierced through the rock and stopped. This brief moment of restriction on the spear's movement allowed Rem to swing the remaining axe in his right hand, deflecting the spear's trajectory. Finally, he threw the axe in his left hand. The axe in his left hand instantly reached the enemy's head. It seemed like it would split the skull as usual, but the axe stopped in midair. The blade and handle of the axe trembled.
So that's what you've been using all along.
Rem, who had finally caught on, spoke. The opponent tilted his head and replied.
A half-baked one, was it?
With pale skin that didn't match his white hair, Rem knew who this person was. In fact, he had already figured it out earlier.
The madman who chases after immortality, the ageless lunatic, right?
Knowing that won't save your life.
The words were accompanied by a soft smile, a smile naturally tinged with eeriness. With such an appearance, it was only natural. Rem recalled stories he had heard during his time in the tribe, but he pushed them aside.
Half-baked, poorly trained. How many ribs on the left are broken? 2? 3?
The opponent asked. Due to overexertion with his already cracked ribs, 2 more had broken. If he hadn't tensed his muscles to hold on, it would have been worse. A slightly worse outcome could have seen the broken bones piercing his lungs or organs, leading to a fatal situation. Also, he couldn't deny the accusation of being half-baked. It was true. Rem had redefined and mastered some of the techniques he had learned from his tribe in his own way. However, he had given up on learning and receiving the rest of the necessary teachings. So he was only half-trained.
A guy who hasn't properly mastered the art. No inherited spirit either.
Boom. As the man spoke, he pulled out a small metal orb from his chest. Around his left arm, the form of a blue beast appeared faintly.
Ah, witchcraft.
And powerful witchcraft at that. His left arm was likely imbued with the strength of a beast, adding to his original physical power. The simple stone in his hand now felt like an immense threat. Rem hesitated for just a moment. Whether it was witchcraft or anything else, his ribs were broken, and his left ankle had also taken some strain from blocking those 2 spear strikes. But he pushed that aside too.
Should I just kill him?
If he risked his life and attacked, he could do it. But was there really a need for that? Although he might seem like a reckless warrior who didn't know how to retreat, Rem was a person who lived life on his own terms. So,
Hey,
Rem opened his mouth to speak. The ageless lunatic, the bastard who had massacred an entire tribe in the West and stolen all their secrets, responded.
why? See you around.
What?
Rem pulled out 2 fist-sized spheres wrapped in paper from his pocket. As soon as he saw them, the lunatic threw his spear. Regardless of the incoming spear, the spheres Rem had taken out exploded with a bang. Gray smoke quickly billowed out, obscuring the view. The spear pierced through the smoke, but soon only the sound of crash, splinter, could be heard as it shattered a tree.
This bastard.
The ageless barbarian listened carefully. Despite being a skilled hunter, tracking sound alone would be difficult. A true hunter knows how to hide as well as they know how to chase, but giving up would be ridiculous. The ageless lunatic closed and then reopened his eyes. Soon his eyes glowed with a blue light. It was a form of sorcery. With the power of the spell, the lunatic's eyes could now see through obstacles.
Run all you want.
The lunatic started moving, following the traces his eyes had detected. His pace was no slower than Rem's.
Is he just out having fun?
It was a rhetorical question, almost like talking to himself. The entire squad nodded in agreement with Enkrid's words.
He'll come back when it's time, whatever.
Enkrid wasn't worried about Rem. It wasn't because he didn't have the luxury to be concerned right now. He was Rem, after all. The same Rem who had earned the nickname Mad Barbarian, and was the reason their company was known as the Madmen.
He might have just gone back to his old stomping grounds,
Jackson remarked idly. It sounded more like wishful thinking. The two had quite a brotherly relationship. Now that he was gone, Jackson spoke about him with a tone of concern.
Yeah, nothing to worry about.
Enkrid said while tending to his sword.
Me, worried?
Jackson's tone turned menacing. One wrong word here, and it felt like he might really stab someone.
Ha. Seems our savage brother is off taking a nap somewhere.
Auden tried to diffuse the tension. Worry there was none. Enkrid thought about Rem and figured.
He'll come back when it's time.
That's just how he was. He'd have his fun and return in due time. When they got back to the camp, they heard that Kreis's operation was a great success. Sinner had beheaded 4 of their commanders, and the cultists had lost some of their supplies.
Rem, maybe he's just out taking a walk or something.
Kreis had said about the gray-haired barbarian's absence. Even someone who was usually so pessimistic and worried had this to say. Enkrid thought the same. Just focus on the task at hand, and that's what he did. He kept his eyes on the situation ahead.
The enemy?
As planned.
They were back at Graham's camp. If the two armies went into full-scale battle, who would win?
Well, Aspen, of course.
The onlooker, who had been merely watching, would soon sweep through the entire area. Therefore, the troops deployed to Green Pearl couldn't be withdrawn. On the contrary, they were even requesting reinforcements from that direction. This meant that Aspen's army was positioned in a highly aggressive location. If things went south, they would pounce without hesitation. So, this was the only way. Kreis had to disrupt the armies of the Black Blade bandits and the cultists with minimal losses.
No need to kill them all.
The goal was to break their morale and force them to retreat. Buying time was key. They needed to do this while preserving as much of their own strength as possible. This was the best strategy for that. Strike them both before they could fully engage. Then, force them into a full-scale battle. One decisive battle. With that battle, the enemy would be forced to retreat and crumble. They needed to make them collapse and retreat on their own. That was the key.
First, we break the enemy's prepared weapon. This must be done by Commander Enkrid.
Kreis had spent days thinking about what he would do if he were the commander of the Black Blade, or the cultists. This was the answer he arrived at. They were aware of the Madman platoon. Even if they didn't know their exact strength, they would have prepared a trump card. If they faced that without any preparation, the damage would be severe.
We have to lure them into a full-scale battle.
With their supplies damaged and their commanders lost, the two units would regroup. They would also realize that this wasn't going to be a prolonged fight. And with Enkrid's presence,
that alone would be enough to draw them out.
Second, Viscount Tarnan must die.
To sever their justification.
Third, we must head to Green Pearl immediately after the battle.
It meant they had to finish before Aspen could make a move.
If things go south, we'll all be buried here,
Graham said. Kreis nodded slightly, though he had no intention of being buried here himself. Nevertheless, it was true that many would have to fight with their lives on the line. As Kreis had intended, the cultists, having lost part of their supplies, joined forces with the main force of the Black Blade, instead of requisitioning from nearby villages. The combined armies of the Black Blade and the cultists began advancing towards the broad plains. The Border Guard Reserve unit moved forward, leaving the walls behind. Holding a defensive position would be like inviting Aspen to strike their exposed back with glee. They had no choice but to advance. A cold wind blew, carrying dust between the two forces. Under the dark sky and over the frozen, barren ground, the two armies faced each other.
We must win!
The Madman platoon was clustered near the center of the battlefield. Kreis had also come out. If the battle went poorly, he needed to be close to Enkrid to escape. Enkrid understood his intentions, but let it slide. He figured it was a reasonable course of action.
We must win.
Enkrid mulled over Kreis's words. He thought that winning didn't necessarily mean it had to be him. In the end, all he needed to do was show them how to win the battle. A few thoughts flashed through his mind, but he didn't say anything to Kreis. From now on, it was the time for those who wielded swords, just as he was about to step forward. Thud! The enemy had arrived. Someone rode out on horseback and threw something towards the center of the two armies. It was just outside the range of their arrows.
What's that?
Vengeance frowned as he muttered to himself.
Pick it up.
He quickly gave the order. One of the scouts rode out on horseback and retrieved the object. It was soon in Enkrid's hands. The weapon was familiar. As he examined the recovered axe, Ragna spoke.
It's the barbarian's relic.
We'll make a grave and bury it. You can bury it with him then.
Ragna and Jackson each made a remark. They were strangely in sync at times like this. Several soldiers recognized the axe, and among them were those who noticed Rem's absence. Some of the troops began to murmur.
What's going on? Did Captain Rem die? No, didn't he just burn down the cultists' camp a few days ago? He didn't return after that. Maybe he's on another mission? What could be more urgent than this?
Enkrid let the voices around him drift through one ear and out the other as he examined the axe. The blade was heavily chipped, and there were many deep, ugly marks on it. It was clear that it had seen rough combat.
Looks like he went off to have some fun,
Enkrid said.
We might as well consider him dead.
This time it was Dunbachel who muttered. They were all quite sincere individuals. Their tone was so genuine that it was almost palpable. Enkrid listened with one ear while keeping an eye on the enemy. On one side there was a pack of wolf beasts, and on the other, human troops. These were the allied forces of the Black Blade bandits and the cultists. Among them, Viscount Tarnin, awkwardly clad in chainmail, stepped forward and shouted,
"I shall personally cut off the heads of these traitors and present them to the king. Strike down the rebels who dared to plot treason."
He raised his sword high as he spoke. His voice was loud, quite loud. It even spread widely, likely with the help of a magical device, but no one moved.
That idiot.
Chryse cursed the pig, who was good for nothing but rhetoric. As Enkrid moved to the front of the troops, a sharp-eyed scout spoke up.
Someone's coming.
Just as the scout said, a figure emerged, walking slowly from the direction of the Viscount's army. The figure was bathed in the dim sunlight filtering through the clouds.
A big guy?
He's pretty large, about as big as Audin. Enkrid stared intently at the figure approaching from a distance. The man wasn't on horseback but walking on his own 2 feet. He wasn't moving fast or slow, but there was an air of confidence about him. After all, what else could it be but confidence to walk alone to the center of a battlefield?
Should we shoot?
One of the archers asked.
No.
Enkrid replied. Despite his command, some archers uneasily raised their hands to their bowstrings before lowering them again. Starting with arrows fired by archers is the beginning of any battle. It's the basic principle of war. Growls and barks erupted from several wolves behind the man. The noise was deafening, but the man simply scratched his ear and shouted,
My name is Lycanos. Send out your best fighter.
As he stomped his foot, the ground shook with a resounding thud. How is he that strong? The soldier's morale cooled instantly. Rem seemed to have been beaten, and this opponent looked formidable. He didn't seem any less capable than the renowned Enkrid. Breaking the enemy's spirit before a battle begins is one of the most effective tactics. This was a duel. If you have a strong hand, it's best to use it. The Black Blade bandits had, of course, prepared their own strong hand. Ragnar took a step forward. Audin also reacted. Enkrid drew his sword and brought it down in front of the two. It wasn't fast, but it was light. The blade, glowing with a blue hue, cut through the air, halting their advance.
He's mine. You two handle something else.
Enkrid's gaze remained fixed on Lycanos. At the same time, Enkrid was also contemplating the means to unravel the battle and the battlefield. How many more battles would follow, and what could be gained today? The stage was set by Chryse, so it was up to him to reap and take what was his from it.
When did I become so confident?
A surge of confidence welled up in his chest, urging him to engage in this battle. Enkrid didn't dislike it. This was the place he had always wanted, the position he had desired, and it was waiting for him.
Jackson.
Yes.
Look for a chance to take out that boar's head.
It didn't have to be today. It could be in the next battle. It didn't matter when, but what needed to be done had to be done.
Understood.
Jackson nodded nonchalantly. That was reassuring. He wouldn't fail.
Audin, Teresa, it looks like there's something big among those wolves.
When they infiltrated the enemy's territory, there had been 3 large beasts, but it seemed only one was left. No, was it even bigger? It wouldn't matter. Just another big beast. However, it wouldn't do to let regular soldiers face that thing. His instincts told him so.
Brother, it will be as you wish. Let us pray.
Audin clasped his hands together and quietly stepped back, while Teresa knelt beside him and spoke.
As you command.
Then Dunbachel tugged at her collar. Ragnar was beside her. His expression was cold, but his eyes clearly spoke. I want to fight. I have the will. I can cut that thing down with my sword right now. Seeing Ragnar's determination was more enjoyable than he expected. He had never felt frustrated watching him laze around before. But watching someone waste their talent is never pleasant. Of course, with his solid heart that could brush things off easily, it didn't bother him much.
A genius's determination.
It was enjoyable to see Ragnar's determination. Just because it didn't bother him to see the opposite, didn't mean this wasn't enjoyable. Moreover, it was also pleasing to see himself standing beside such a determined Ragnar.
Slash as you please, cut down everything you see, but only after those wolves are dealt with.
If the enemy had prepared a giant wolf, on their side, they had a beast man more ferocious than any wolf, and a sword that could cut through anything. If they sent these two into the ranks of the common soldiers, the battle would quickly tilt in their favor. There was no need to go to greater lengths to boost morale. Just having these two step forward would change the course of the battle. A battlefield dominated by an elite few. This was why it was the truth, and these two would prove it. That would be enough. Dunbachel nodded and snorted in agreement.
That will be enough. We'll do it in a way that would make Krimhalt proud.
Krimhalt was the god worshipped by the Beastkin, the god of war and fertility. To show something to the god meant to display a battle that was not shameful. It was thanks to Rem. The torment of the barbarians had evolved one of the beast women into a mad warrior.
I'll yield.
Hearing Ragnar's calm words, Enkrid also began to move forward.
I was wondering when you'd show up. I thought no one there had any balls. Are you staying up all night?
Lycanos shouted provocatively, tapping his groin. It was both a taunt and a way to boost his own side's morale. He wasn't expecting a response.
Wow, ballless bastards, no balls at all, idiots.
The enemy soldiers hurled insults. In response, Enkrid's soldiers also raised their voices.
You're the ones who are ridiculous. We've got them. Biggest ones you've ever seen. Worm-like bandit scum.
Amidst the jeers and cheers, Enkrid slowly walked forward, and Graham asked from behind.
You think you can win?
Yes, even if I die, we will win.
Was he prepared to die? Graham crossed his arms, hiding his unease. Enkrid was simply being honest. He meant it literally. If the obstacle in front of him was a wall, if that wall was death, he would surpass it, and by doing so he would win. Strangely, Enkrid felt no excitement as he stood before his opponent. His physical condition wasn't particularly good or bad.
They're there, and they're probably bigger than yours.
After facing off with Lycanos, Enkrid spoke, causing Lycanos' lips to twist into a smirk.
Is that so? Bigger than mine? I've never seen anyone bigger than me. Arrogant bastard. You. You're that guy, aren't you? Enkrid, or whatever they call you.
The opponent already knew his name. Of course, Enkrid knew his opponent too. He had heard that Lycanos was one of the influential figures in the Black Blade Bandits. His stature was as large as Audin's, and the heavy weapon strapped to his back hinted at his fighting style. Lycanos subtly advanced his left foot. He stepped inside the distance that Enkrid had maintained. Enkrid reacted immediately, drawing the sword from his left hip and slashing it. Lycanos, despite his size, quickly retreated out of the striking distance, more than 2 steps back from where he had started. The blade sliced through the air. Following the diagonal upward movement of the sword, Lycanos swung his weapon. A black shadow seemed to curve as it flew from behind him. As he watched the weapon descend vertically, Enkrid also shifted his position. His feet skimmed the ground as he moved. He sidestepped to the right, circling around to the enemy's side. The iron mace slammed into the ground where Enkrid had just stood. Dirt and stones scattered in all directions. Some of them struck Enkrid's body and head, but he ignored the small debris, and as soon as he caught the opponent's flank, drew his gladius and thrust forward. The first stab, a quick jab learned through repeating today, slipped between Lycanos' ribs. It was a rapid thrust. Lycanos raised his arm and trapped the blade between his arm and side. His reaction speed and reflexes were remarkable. He tried to twist his body to break the sword, but it didn't go as he intended.
Damned tough.
The enraged Lycanos swung his mace again. The wind pressure from the horizontally swinging mace struck Enkrid's face before the weapon itself could reach him. Enkrid didn't need to see it. He judged the mace's trajectory by sound alone. He immediately ducked. Even a glancing blow from such a blunt weapon would crush and tear human flesh, but it passed just above his head. Enkrid activated the heart of great strength and twisted his gladius. Inhale. With a short, sharp intake of breath, the muscles in his left arm swelled as if they would explode. The blade twisted, threatening to grind through the flesh of Lycanos' side and arm. Unable to withstand it, Lycanos released his grip on the blade with his side.
You bastard.
Blood dripped from the inside of Lycanos' arm. His side armor only bore a scratch, but the inside of his arm was definitely shredded.
Does it hurt?
As Enkrid spoke, he steadied his breathing and drove the sword in his right hand downward vertically. At the same time, he withdrew the gladius and sheathed it. Lycanos stepped back to avoid the incoming strike. He wasn't just a brute swinging a mace around. His movements were concise and sharp. He was a well-trained opponent with years of experience in real combat. The blade sliced through the air. And through the gap created by the swing, Lycanos' gaze remained fixed on Enkrid. His dull, dark brown eyes reminded Enkrid of Jackson. They looked sinister. Lycanos kicked off the ground again, charging forward. The hardened earth cracked, and solid chunks of dirt shot up like stones. Enkrid placed his left hand on the hilt of his gladius. He feigned drawing it, but then quickly moved his feet. This time, he pushed off with his toes and stepped back, a backstep. He evaded all the stone fragments that had sprung up between them.
Dodged.
Lycanos wondered as he continued his motion. He lifted his mace and swung it diagonally from above. At the same time, he crossed his feet and lunged forward. Before Lycanos could complete his move, Enkrid released the sword in his right hand and swung it downward. To an observer, it might have looked like he suddenly dropped his sword and swiped at the air. But in his hand was a whistle dagger, and that was a different story. The whistle dagger lodged itself into Lycanos' face at close range. From the beginning, Enkrid had anticipated that his opponent would evade or block the sword, so he had gripped the whistle dagger in his right hand while swinging the sword. Now, it paid off. He had learned the technique of hiding a dagger in his sleeve from Torres of the Border Guard unit. All of these skills came into play. Lycanos' head snapped back, only to return forward a moment later. Unfortunately, it wasn't the result Enkrid had hoped for.
You damn!
The blade was caught between Lycanos' front teeth. Though his upper teeth had cracked with a sharp sound, he had managed to stop the blade.
Hey, spit it out. It's not for eating,
Enkrid said. His taunts were always well-timed. Lycanos spat out the dagger, and flames of fury ignited in his eyes.
I'll kill you for sure. Before I do, I'll crush that too. You think you're big? I'll grind you down until you can't even be seen.
His words were filled with disdain, but Enkrid maintained his composure, not even offering a mocking smile, securing a psychological victory as well. The mace came swinging again. This time Enkrid gripped his sword with both hands and deflected it. It was like a snake sword meant to deflect and strike back.
Brute strength.
Even with the heart of great strength activated, Lycanos' strength was superior.
Willpower.
The thought crossed his mind. If there's a will for refusal, then there must also be a will that grants great strength. Unable to fully deflect, the mace and sword clashed and locked together. Lycanos, in that position, applied more force, pushing the mace forward. He placed his other hand on the opposite end of the mace and took a deep breath. He intended to crush Enkrid with sheer strength. Enkrid stepped back with his left foot. His knee bent halfway. He was being overpowered. As Lycanos pressed down from above, he spoke.
What? You thought you couldn't be overpowered? Hey, you bastard. Did you think you were the only one with strength?
No, there are plenty stronger than me, always.
Not just Auden, but Rem, Ragna, and even Teresa. He still wasn't confident he could overpower them.
Your front tooth is broken.
Thanks to the force he applied earlier, Enkrid could see that the tooth that had blocked the dagger was now broken.
I bet the women won't like that.
Enkrid's well-placed comment was enough to draw out Lycanos' rage. The beast roared in fury. Enkrid gathered strength, ready to unleash his own shout. Was this opponent easily provoked? The brief questions crossed his mind during the battle but was quickly forgotten. There was no time or room for such thoughts. The opponent was strong, very strong. This wasn't like the half-baked mercenaries who were barely knight level. Locked in the same position, Lycanos suddenly released his left hand, clenched it into a fist, and swung. Enkrid tightened his trapezius muscles and turned his head to deflect the blow. This was the Valaf-style martial arts, using the body to deflect attacks. He didn't just take the hit. As he twisted his body to evade, he kicked Lycanos in the shin. A heavy thud echoed against Lycanos' armor.
That hurt, you bastard.
Lycanos said, completely letting go of his weapon. He then tried to grab Enkrid by the collar with his right hand. Enkrid used his left hand, drawing his second sword, the gladius, intending to slice off Lycanos' fingers. But Lycanos anticipated this and withdrew his hand. Their hands and feet clashed repeatedly. Enkrid mixed in sword strikes, continuing the close-quarters combat, but no decisive blow was landed. The exchange was fierce and brutal, but neither could land a killing strike. Enkrid's head was bleeding from a wound, and Lycanos, who had lost his helmet in the fight, had his lip split and his cheek cut, with blood streaming down. Enkrid had also taken a hit to the stomach, making it difficult for him to catch his breath. In that brief moment, Lycanos managed to deliver a spinning kick to Enkrid's chin, executing a move that sent him spinning in the air. Both combatants were not in their best shape when they finally separated.
It's been a while since I've faced someone like you,
Lycanos remarked.
I see them often.
Enkrid replied.
First time I've met someone who never loses a word.
Lycanos retorted.
Ah, that part I'm used to.
Winning, that is. Lycanos clenched his molars. With his front tooth broken, his face looked somewhat less imposing, but his killing intent remained the same.
You're one unlucky bastard.
After that remark, Lycanos swung his mace again, but Enkrid found it strange. Something was different, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. There wasn't enough time to dodge and create distance, so he had to block it. He raised his sword and softly guided it. Instead of withstanding the impact like before, the mace slid off the snake sword to the side. Just as the thick metal mace slid off the blade in that split moment, Lycanos' body moved twice as fast as before. Enkrid's focus flared hotter than ever. The mace? It was just a shell. In the slowed down time, Lycanos had drawn his true weapon, a thin, rapier-like sword concealed within the mace. He drew and thrust the sword. It was faster than any sword Enkrid had ever seen. As soon as he blocked the thrust, it was like a bolt of light shot towards him. It touched him before he could even register it. Just before the sword could skewer him like a spit, his hyper-focused state triggered the sense of evasion. Enkrid instinctively twisted his body. As a result, the blade grazed his side and dug into his right upper arm. Every moment passed like a dream, like a fleeting scene. The sound of the sword being drawn, the sound of it cutting into flesh, and the pain that followed, all of it was absent. In that fragmented, flowing scene, driven by the survival instincts honed through countless battles, Enkrid moved reflexively. The next movement was the same. Twisting his body and pulling back his right arm, he raised the sword in his left hand and struck. The gladius became a fearsome, swift slash aimed at his opponent's face. Enkrid's sword slashed from Lycanos' chin up to his left eye. A different kind of slicing sound echoed between them as both men staggered back. No, it was more like they were flung apart. "Fire!" someone shouted. Regardless of whether the two were still standing, both armies began firing arrows. The duel was over, the full-scale battle had begun. Enkrid wobbled and dropped to one knee. Someone from behind caught him as he fell.
"We're pulling back,"
Jackson said. Enkrid nodded. As Jackson grabbed Enkrid, a foreboding sense of intuition kicked in.
These crazy bastards.
The moment the bandit Lycanos retreated, a group of others filled the gap and charged at them. Their movements were well trained, clearly a pre-arranged attack for such a situation. The sound of blades cutting through the air was the first thing Jackson heard. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Dressed in black, the assailants, who had been lying in wait, thrust their spear-like swords forward. Each one was a reckless, full-bodied charge, and they were all incredibly fast. Their thrusts were aimed at piercing a single point, a heavy and swift strike, an attack where they seemingly burned their lives for a single blow. Jackson, pulling Enkrid closer with his left hand, swung his sword with his right. At the same time, he made the coldest judgment he had ever made.
I can't block them all.
Jackson's sword moved as if it were dancing. It was reminiscent of a butterfly's fluttering wings. The sword tip weaved through the barrage of descending blades like a butterfly in flight. As the butterfly's wings collided with the blades, they caused irregular movements. Each impact deflected the trajectory of most of the blades. Clang, 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 clang. He couldn't deflect all of them. He missed 2 strikes. One of those missed strikes grazed Enkrid's left shin. To be more precise, Enkrid had twisted his body to avoid it. The fabric and leather of his protective gear tore and fluttered. The last strike hit Enkrid's waist. It made a dull sound, but the blade didn't pierce his body and was deflected.
Armor.
It was the power of the armor he had acquired earlier. Jackson had seen the captain wrap it around him like bandages before. Jackson tightened his grip on Enkrid with his left arm. He intended to throw Enkrid backward and cut down the remaining attackers. But just as he was about to throw Enkrid, the assailants scattered.
Damn.
Fighting while protecting someone wasn't Jackson's specialty. He was used to fighting with enemies at his back, not while protecting an ally. He had little experience in that, and it was because of this inexperience.
A mistake.
He should have taken the damage and kept Enkrid behind him, or moved him far enough away that the enemy couldn't reach him, but he had missed the timing. The men in black jumped overhead, attacked from below, and charged in from both sides. Their attacks were terrifyingly relentless, distracted by the enemies behind him.
I'm fine.
Enkrid's voice reached him. Though his right arm was injured and he was tired, he wasn't close to death yet. But the problem was,
these crazy bastards are really...
The black-clad assault unit was throwing themselves at them, not caring for their own lives. Jackson couldn't easily dismiss these men who wore thin, flexible leather instead of armor. Wherever they learned it, their precision in aiming for a single point was impressive. Jackson kept swinging his sword, constantly moving his feet. Slice, stab, thud. The blade cut through a forearm and a thigh was pierced. Jackson's sword played its role as an emotionless piece of steel, but the attackers twisted their bodies and continued their assault as long as they were still alive. They seemed like a mad group, stripped of their humanity, focused solely on piercing their opponent with a fast sword. When Jackson sidestepped to avoid them, a sword flew toward where he had just been standing. He had avoided it by sensing the danger a split second earlier. The blade sank into the cold ground. The attacker, who had driven his sword into the ground and looked up, had a ghostly look in his eyes. Of course, none of that mattered to Jackson, so he simply embedded a knife into the forehead of the one who had missed his strike. The ordinary knife, which flew with a whoosh, became the Grim Reaper and took another life. Jackson continued to gradually reduce their numbers, even though fighting openly wasn't his specialty. Enkrid, observing Jackson's battle, refocused on the enemies coming at him.
This isn't good.
His right arm had been injured by Lycanos, and his shin had been grazed in the recent strike, but the injury was far more severe than a mere scratch. The leather of his guard was cleanly cut, leaving clear marks on both his skin and some of his muscles. The blow aimed at his torso had been stopped by his armor, but the impact remained. His internal organs shook, his abdominal muscles had absorbed the shock, and this was the result. If it had been an ordinary person, their organs would have ruptured. To make matters worse, Lycanos' final strike had rendered his right arm nearly useless. He could only move his left arm now. Enkrid did what he could. He sheathed the gladius and took up his original sword in his left hand, swinging it. He minimized his leg movements and held the sword with a fluid grip. It was the fluid sword technique. He parried and deflected the attacks. His breathing was steady. His stamina was monstrous, unmatched by anyone. Clang, 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 clang. After deflecting 3 or 4 blades in a split second, the next blade was suddenly right in front of him. It was a blade sharpened to a piercing shine.
I can't block this one.
The heart of the beast awakened, and the focus point ignited his brain. Even if he did his best, he knew he would lose an eye. His opponent's skills were superior. The moment they failed to kill the main force, Lycanos had prepared this platoon of swordsmen. This was the result. He could clearly see the future where he lost an eye. While he couldn't avoid it, he could at least question and answer himself. Lose an eye? So what if that happens? Losing one eye wouldn't change anything. Enkrid turned his head. He tried to twist and avoid the attack. In his mind, the option of dying here and starting over didn't exist. If he were the kind of person who would throw away his life and give up over something like this, he would have stopped and been weeded out long ago in the endless repetition of today. The moment the sword tip enlarged and appeared like a thick club. With a crisp noise, the club that had been blocking his vision disappeared. The owner of the sword who had been aiming at him was sent flying through the air. Naturally, the sword followed.
Arg.
Screaming, he flew, and he flew well. In that moment, he might not have envied a bird. Of course, his flight was short-lived, and its end was anything but graceful. The flying man crashed among the border guard reserve unit, and, startled by the sudden arrival of a body, A soldier thrust his spear, skewering the man in midair, killing him. Enkrid, in his effort to block, endure, and not die, ended up falling backward. He landed hard on his rear. As he looked to his side, he saw a wild horse that had just sent a man flying with a kick from its hind legs.
Odd eyes.
The horse seemed to protest the name, but in this moment, the hastily given name didn't even register in his mind. And before he knew it, Esther had appeared beside him. She hadn't transformed into a human, still in the form of a lake panther. The silk-like black fur that covered her body reminded him of her hair when she was human. Meanwhile, beside the black-clad stabbing platoon, another figure appeared, a man who could survive any situation as long as he had his sword. Whoosh, thud, whoosh, thunk, whoosh, thwack, whoosh, slice. Enkrid's eyes darted rapidly, trying to keep up with the continuous sword strikes happening before him. Ragnar, swinging his sword sideways, took down 5 men in front of him with 5 swift slashes.
What kind of technique is that?
His stride was a single step, yet his sword struck 5 times. How could that be possible? It was a strike that defied comprehension. It was faster than the enemy's speed, a preemptive strike. Ragnar's sword was now demonstrating that.
I'll kill them all. You go on ahead.
His voice was gruff, and his bangs hung low, partially obscuring his eyes. Through his blonde hair, his dry red eyes stared silently ahead. He deflected arrows flying overhead and killed the enemies approaching him. Ragnar's sword began to move so quickly that even Enkrid's eyes could hardly follow it. As arrows rained down over Enkrid's head, several soldiers with shields approached from behind.
Damned impressive.
This comment came from Dunbachel, who had been watching from the side. She made this remark while smashing the skull of an assassin who had tried to ambush them from behind with 2 daggers. The moment she sensed the approaching assassin, she had planted her right foot on the ground and crushed the assassin's skull with her left knee. Of course, Enkrid had also reacted, raising his sword in response. Regardless, her attention was also focused on Ragnar, with arrows pouring down, Odd Eyes coming to his rescue as if flying, and Esther and Dunbachel, along with allied soldiers holding large round shields and encircling him. Enkrid felt that he was no longer in mortal danger. His gaze naturally shifted forward.
Lycanos.
Ragnar's sword was fast now, but in that final moment, the sword of Lycanos had been even faster, and the swords of the attackers who had just charged at him were similarly fast. The enemies who had been recklessly charging retreated after Ragnar cut down several of them. In the process, Ragnar's thigh was grazed, his armor was sliced, and blood stained his clothing, but Ragnar acted as if it were nothing and returned to the front.
Don't hold back on the arrows. Die, you bastards. The flower of the battlefield is the infantry. The end of pain is pleasure.
All around, curses and battle cries erupted as the fighting continued. Some died with arrows embedded in their heads. Others were struck by throwing axes, causing them to fall forward mid-charge.
Yorororororo.
An enemy mercenary in a strange fur-lined leather armor pounded his chest and let out an odd battle cry. Suddenly, Bel appeared and hurled a spear, striking the mercenary down.
But I will keep moving, die. Fight.
Bel's shout echoed. Enkrid was carried backward. 3 soldiers helped support him. The wound on his left shin was serious enough that walking was out of the question.
Shit, they're really tough.
Graham, looking out across the battlefield, muttered. There, in the distance, was Lycanos. Enkrid saw him too. He hadn't gone down without a fight. He had managed to land a blow on Lycanos' face. Even though half of his face was now drenched in blood, Lycanos smiling or saying a word, Lycanos looked at Enkrid and his group before turning away. As he retreated, the black-clad rapid sword assault platoon gathered around him.
There are so many of them.
Graham muttered.
Indeed.
Kreis, who was standing behind them with a pale face, agreed. A unit that risked their lives to kill with a single thrust. Even at a glance, there seemed to be more than 50 left, considering the number of enemies they had already killed, and the additional attacks from hidden assassins they had to fend off.
This is going to be a headache.
Enkrid thought this, and Kreis agreed with him. The battle was brief. Auden didn't engage since the Wolf Bishop didn't take action, and Ragnar also refrained from going deeper into the fight. Jackson had returned at some point as well. The commanders of both armies didn't seem intent on ending the battle in just one day. Before the situation could be fully assessed, Graham, with a pale face, approached Enkrid, who was already trying to stop the bleeding with some hastily applied bandages. Seeing this, Christ spoke up.
We knew from the start that it wouldn't end in just one go. If we can finish it within 3, that's good enough. We just need to break their main force. After all, battles are usually decided by the strength of a few elite fighters.
His voice sounded drained, and it was understandable. Christ believed in Enkrid's strength. He was confident that even if Enkrid couldn't take off the enemy's head in a single blow, he would ultimately emerge victorious. But that wasn't the case. The first battle was practically a defeat. Moving their position back inside the castle would be the worst outcome, so they had to see it through here, and it had to be done as quickly as possible. They had only 3 attempts within this limited time.
If we just hold on, we'll lose.
The border guard hadn't even drawn their swords yet.
Damn it.
Crace outwardly remained calm, but inwardly he was considering escape. It was time to seriously think about a way out.
Could we escape through a hidden passage?
He had made various preparations just in case.
The cultists seem to just be watching. They've only sent a few wolf beasts after us.
Graham, surveying the battlefield, hesitated to deploy the heavy infantry. If the enemy was conserving their strength, so should they. If they committed their forces prematurely and were pushed back, it would be a massacre. If the battle between the elites was closely matched, then the regular infantry would have to decide the outcome, and the role of the heavy infantry wouldn't be insignificant.
That's right, but I'm not sure if they'll just watch tomorrow.
Christ said, looking at Enkrid. The captain remained as composed as ever, his expression calm and indifferent.
This is really going to kill me.
He couldn't just abandon them and run. Christ had been a merchant, a thief, and even a pickpocket at one time, but never had he turned his back on someone who had saved his life. That was a matter of character, beyond any profession. Besides, with just a bit of effort, they could be saved. It wasn't something that required risking his own life.
Next time, I'll be the one to cut them down. They're fast, though.
Ragnar spoke, and Enkrid responded with his usual calm demeanor.
If that's all there is, then just cutting them down will end it.
Ragnar's resolute words made Enkrid pause, in thought. They were fast indeed. His right arm was unusable, and his left shin was in pain. The armor had protected him, but his stomach was bruised. Although his internal organs weren't damaged, they ached. The isolation technique was an art built upon repeated days. He had endured thanks to the strength maintained, trained, and sustained over time, so taking a hit to the torso was something that would heal with a good meal and a night's rest. But his right arm was a different matter.
We'll rest for now and get through the night. Be vigilant against night raids and keep the scouts active.
Graham shouted. The heavy infantry would personally handle the watch tonight. Although the battle had been brief, the casualties were unprecedented. The number of dead had reached double digits. Enkrid was lost in deep thought. Christ noticed this and stepped in front of Enkrid. With the torch behind him, his shadow flickered and danced over Enkrid's head. They were inside a newly pitched tent, with a wild horse outside, and Ragnar, Audun, Dunbeichel, Teresa, and Esther inside. A cold wind blew through the half-open tent flap, causing the torch flames to flicker. Christ's shadow wavered, splitting into 2 before merging back into 1.
Why?
Enkrid was leaning back at a slight angle. Christ had just finished changing his bandages. Swallowing hard, Christ spoke.
Let's run away.
For Christ, this was only natural. Why risk your life in a hopeless battle? Why fight here, ready to die?
Unless reinforcements arrive.
Given the circumstances, it was unlikely. But it wasn't impossible. To even see a glimpse of those reinforcements, they had to give up what needed to be given up. Like Green Pearl or the Border Guard Fortress. They had watchtowers they built over time and newly dug moats, but if they were attacked from both sides, all of it would be useless.
What we have now means nothing.
Sometimes it's wise to wait for the next opportunity. Just holding out isn't always the best course of action. Christ had come to this conclusion after some thought and said,
Let's run!
Enkrid looked intently at those big eyes.
This time it seems like his eyes are clear.
He didn't look like someone consumed by fear and anxiety. So is he asking this with a clear mind, not knowing what will happen if they run away? Enkrid widened his view and scanned the room. Aside from Big Eyes, everyone else, all the members, had their eyes fixed on him. Whatever choice he made here, they would follow his words. That's how it appeared. Even that odd-eyed wild horse sneaking around outside the tent would do the same. And Esther, of course. And Rem, who had left his place, probably sleeping somewhere, would somehow follow them if Enkrid wasn't there when he returned. Ragnar, too, would find his way back even if he got lost and lost again. Why? What was he to them? What did they see in him to follow him like this? He couldn't force his will on them. He couldn't impose something he had decided to protect. Enkrid couldn't do that.
You can go.
That's why he said it. Chryse was pleased but waited for the next words.
And you?
Jackson, who usually got blunt when annoyed, asked directly. That guy seemed to be waiting for the right moment to speak informally, like now.
I'm not going.
Why not? You've done enough at this point.
Even Chryse subtly dropped the formalities. Enkrid didn't mind. Instead, he said what he wanted to say.
When you sell your sword for gold, you're a mercenary.
It sounded nonsensical, but everyone silently looked at him. Seeing that they were waiting for his next words, Enkrid realized that he had learned from them, but they had also learned from him. The attitude of listening. Everyone's ears were open. Even if their ears were closed, he could still say what he needed to, but if they listened, that was even better.
And I will become a knight.
He swallowed. The thoughts he had regularly, thoughts from some day in the past, were now refined and solidified into a pillar. Enkrid sat up, leaning at an angle. Pain surged through his shin and right arm. It wasn't unbearable. It was tolerable. At least it was much better than dying. Persistent pain was merely a reminder that he was alive, that he hadn't wasted a day.
I hear that a lot.
Jackson commented, almost like he was adding to the conversation. Enkrid pulled his legs in and adjusted to a more comfortable position.
If you don't plan on selling your sword for mere gold, then you have to sell it for duty and responsibility. And this is my duty and responsibility now.
What is a knight? One who protects what should be protected. Legends, myths, and the knights of the past who shone like the sun said, protect the weak, uphold justice, keep your oaths. Which is the most important? Enkrid came to his own conclusion. Chivalry. Is it chivalry to lay down your life for a lady? If he swore to do so, then yes. If that's his chivalry, it can be acknowledged. But he would never sell his sword for mere gold. Nor would he become a murderer who takes pleasure in killing. Intangible values. Protecting what he believes in, swearing to it, and keeping that oath. To ordinary people, that might seem foolish. But that's Enkrid's dream. This was the path he had been looking at and walking on all along. Despite dying over and over again, he never gave up, and that was why he never settled for today. If Enkrid were to flee now, how many people inside the border guard would die? Children, women, the elderly, and young men. There could be a massacre in the hundreds. Fewer might die, or maybe even more might be slaughtered. One of their opponents was a cultist. A mad group was involved. Of course, considering all of that, it might be more efficient to retreat for now. Giving up what needs to be given up and reclaiming it later might be a better approach. But he wouldn't do that. Enkrid's emotions didn't waver. It wasn't something to waver over. He had made up his mind to do this, and so he would. The border guard was behind him, and Enkrid had sworn to protect them. Even though he wasn't a knight, Enkrid had kept the vow he made to himself that day in the past when he decided to live this way. He had lived like that ever since. That was the kind of person Enkrid was. Chryse's face turned pale again. His eyes drooped, showing his discontent.
This is foolish.
I agree.
Enkrid replied to Chryse's comment, recalling a day from the past. Swoosh!
The rain is pouring down horribly.
The mercenary leader didn't particularly dislike rainy days, but slogging through a sticky swamp for a job was starting to irritate him. It was a relief that they weren't passing through the center of the swamp, but rather through a path, cutting through a small forest on its edge, but that didn't make it enjoyable. The small forest bordering the swamp often gifted them crawling into their armor, and fearless mosquitoes bit the hands of the mercenaries as they walked.
Damn it.
One of the mercenaries, slapping a mosquito on the back of his hand, cursed in frustration. Where the hell were these mosquitoes coming from in this downpour?
Are we there yet?
A mercenary with a fierce look in his eyes shouted. The guide brushed back his wet, drooping black hair and replied,
Soon.
You've been saying that for a while now.
The leader approached. He was big and looked so intimidating that just his appearance gave off an aura of authority. Despite staring directly at him, the guide's blue eyes remained calm.
The rain slowed us down. Fine, let's keep moving.
The leader lightly slapped the back of the guide's head and shook his own. Then he turned to soothe his mercenaries.
You filthy dogs, stop flapping your lips before I toss you into the swamp.
As the leader spoke, he slashed through the long vines blocking their path with his thick blade. With a thud, the cut vines scattered to the sides, revealing the way ahead. Though the leader's words were rough, they quelled the discontent. The guide, Enkrid, watched this and thought that this mercenary group was quite decent. Despite his harsh appearance, the leader took good care of his men, and the mercenaries themselves had their own code of conduct. At least they weren't the type to stab a comrade, friend, or client in the back during a job. If you didn't have that sense, you'd end up as food for bugs or trees while working as a guide. If you didn't want to die on the road, you had to pick your people carefully. This time it seemed he had picked well.
But why are you using that guy instead of a proper pathfinder?
Was he asking because he knew everyone could hear, or was he saying it for them to hear? One of the mercenaries asked this as he moved behind the leader. Swoosh, splatter, splatter. Despite the pouring rain, their conversation was clearly audible. Thanks to the trees covering overhead, the rain was somewhat less intense.
He's cheap.
What?
I said, he's cheap. Though his pathfinding skills aren't great. But on the other hand, he knows how to handle a sword.
Meaning, he's half a fighter and half a pathfinder, making him useful. So, by paying just the pathfinder's fee, they could get an additional combatant. The mercenary leader summed it all up and said Enkrid was cheap. Of course, one dim-witted subordinate muttered,
"He's not that cheap."
He started babbling about how he knew other pathfinders who were cheaper.
Any of them actually know how to find a path.
A comrade from behind sneered.
Want me to kill you? This guy's getting cocky.
After that, there was a flurry of silly jokes. Jokes about killing and sparing, typical talk among rough mercenaries. The job was to be done while staying in a small village within the forest. It was a relatively safe village, with hardly any monsters or beasts nearby. The swamp might have been home to a lizard colony at some point, but some wandering swordsman supposedly came and slaughtered them all a dozen years ago. Since then, whenever monsters started to gather, the village would hire mercenaries. A few gold coins a year kept them free from threats. Swoosh, the pouring rain, blurred vision, damp clothes and armor, so soaked that the gambeson he was wearing was pretty much ruined. It was lucky he wore something cheap in this weather. But when the rain let up a little, the bugs would swarm, and it was hot too. These trees seemed to act as some kind of totem, maintaining a humid atmosphere instead of refreshing air. It was a routine job, clearing out lizards and maintaining the village's surroundings. Enkrid had been toughening up in the nearby village for over half a year, while working as a guide to make a living.
We've arrived.
Though it was a bit rough, he led them to the village he was familiar with.
Welcome.
The village headman, a middle-aged man, welcomed the mercenary group, and after that, they dealt with the lizards that had been drawn by the swamp's scent. They hung ropes made of tree bark, which gave off a smell that the lizards disliked, around the swamp's trees. They also drove stakes into the ground, though it was hard to tell if it would be effective.
This is ancient wisdom, passed down through generations.
The village headman seemed to firmly believe in it. With so much going on, the village frequently needed the help of mercenaries. If a lizard slipped through their defenses, they'd need swords again, and there were hardly any others besides the mercenaries who could step up. Some villagers could fight as combatants, but most seemed far removed from battle. Since Enkrid was also there as a guide and didn't have much else to do, he found himself practicing his sword in a secluded corner of the village.
Mister?
A small child approached him, a bright-eyed kid with fair skin. The child couldn't have been older than 12. Enkrid didn't underestimate him just because he was young, having once been defeated by someone his age, but the kid didn't look like someone who used a sword.
Why do you work so hard?
What followed was predictable. Idle chatter, the frequent visits of the kid, specifically a young girl. That's how Enkrid became friends with the little one.
I'm leaving the village in 3 years.
Is it your dream to die away from home?
Calling it a dream to die outside the village. You're quite bold. Where does she think she's going all by herself at that age?
No, geez, that's not it! You've seen the herbs that drive away lizards, right? Do you think this is the only place in the world with something like that? The herbs that come from this swamp are different.
He'd heard that herbs were the main source of income for the swamp village.
Oh, so your dream is to die away from home.
Oh, come on, seriously.
So what are you going out there for?
I'm going to find some really amazing herbs, and I won't be going alone. I'll just join up with a mercenary group that comes by later.
She called it a dream, to sell herbs disguised as something unknown to the world. Enkrid didn't mock other people's dreams, he just worried.
So your dream is to die searching for herbs, huh?
Ugh, really?
He didn't think their relationship was all that deep. It was a moderate friendship, a way to pass the time. It was something to do when resting a body tired from training. The young girl probably had a similar thought, too. Among the mercenaries who came to the village, most had fierce faces, but there was one guy who seemed relatively gentle, someone who just swung a sword in a corner every day. She talked to him, and he wasn't a bad companion for a bit of banter. That's all it was. The mercenary group's job lasted over a month, and the two continued their trivial conversations.
Is your dream to be a guide?
No, a knight.
A knight? Like the one they call the nightmare of the battlefield?
Yeah.
Maybe you could join me in gathering herbs instead. You can follow me later if you want.
Let's just not talk. No, I really respect you, mister. I'm serious. I mean it.
Look me in the eyes when you say that.
Why was she talking while staring off into the distance?
Huh? What did you say? Now you're pretending not to hear?
She was quite the cheeky little girl. And then, as always, danger arrived without warning.
Hey, what's left for either of us if we fight here? Let me be clear. If you've gotten what you came for, leave. You weren't hired for this.
In Enkrid's opinion, the leader of the mercenary group was a decent person. At least for a mercenary leader he was. He meant it. Then, out of nowhere, came 50 bandits. They spouted nonsense about hearing rumors of hidden jewels in the swamp village. The leader of the mercenary group had to make a choice, and the villagers were left in despair.
Request, I will request you.
The rain had stopped, but the damp air lingered. Every morning, waking up was an unpleasant experience due to the sticky, humid sweat. That unpleasantness only grew worse by midday. When the sun rose overhead, the humidity increased, adding a subtle warmth to the mix. Under the clammy noon sun, with the discomfort, sweat, and heavy, sticky air, the village chief urgently shouted,
I will give you anything you want.
The bandit, who appeared to be the leader, snorted and sneered. It was as if he was daring them to try and fight. The mercenary leader remained silent, and the village chief's face twisted in despair. He looked like he was about to cry.
Please.
Some of the nervous villagers looked at the mercenaries with desperate eyes. Still, there was no response. The leader hummed briefly, as if in thought.
Are they not going to take it?
Enkrid's gaze also turned to the leader. The original task had been completed that morning, and the mercenaries were just about to leave. At that moment, one of the sharp-eyed mercenaries noticed the presence of an observer and captured a bandit who had been scouting. Without the need for interrogation, the bandit revealed the location and number of his group. They weren't well-known bandits, but they had a lot of men, roughly more than 100. Even if you combined all the villagers and mercenaries, they barely had over 30 fighters. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. The mercenary leader pondered.
Mercenaries are people who sell their swords for gold. We don't fight without a contract. This isn't a contract, it's a rescue mission. We don't have that kind of loyalty.
He was a decent person, considering he was a mercenary. From the mercenary leader's perspective, it was the right choice. There was no reason to risk their lives in a fight.
Wise decision.
The bandit leader let out a sigh of relief, albeit quietly. Why wouldn't he? If the mercenaries had decided to fight, the bandits would have had to accept some losses. No matter how well they fought, more than 10 of them would die. No, more than 20 would die. The mercenary leader seemed like a skilled fighter as well. Even if they won, the damage would be significant. If it weren't for that, they would have already wiped them out. If the scout hadn't been caught, they would have waited until the mercenaries left before attacking.
Let him go.
At the leader's command, One of the mercenaries released the captured bandit.
What kind of justice is this? They're going to kill us all. Please. Why? We'll give you everything we have. We even have jewels.
The villagers cried out. One of them even tried to grab the mercenary's leg, but it was no use.
Come closer and I'll cut you down.
One of the mercenaries said in a deadly tone, showing no hesitation in his threat. In fact, the mercenaries had shown their loyalty simply by not siding with the bandits to share the village's wealth. The mercenary leader was wise.
Enough. If you approach us, we'll draw our weapons too. Everyone, back off.
The leader quickly brought the situation under control. He ordered the mercenaries to withdraw to one side while the bandits watched them intently. Enkrid was caught in the middle. He was also a member of the mercenary group, so he could have walked away. But as he turned his gaze indifferently, he noticed a bold little girl. In 3 years, she would leave the village to become an herbalist, an absurdly fearless little girl.
Let's go, mister.
How bold she was. Even in a situation where she should be begging for her life, her eyes were scanning the surroundings, and in the midst of that she waved at him, showing the back of her hand. Her face was not one of resignation. She must have been thinking of how to escape. Enkrid had faced many bandits before. He was not inexperienced, so he knew they would all die. Adding his hand to the fight wouldn't change anything. Should he then refrain from helping? Should he also turn his back and walk away? Should he abandon what he had sought to protect? What is a knight?
What was it that I wanted? What if I turn back now? What if I ignore this? I won't be able to do anything.
How many times have he just watched because he wasn't strong enough? Should he do the same this time? He doesn't know. He've turned a blind eye before, knowing full well what was happening, so why does this time feel like a weight on his chest?
Hey, let's go.
One of the mercenaries patted him on the shoulder from behind. He had a rough demeanor, but he was a kind-hearted friend. He was the kind of guy who would help the villagers with their chores in the meantime. But he didn't hesitate to turn around. That's the basic mindset of a swordsman surviving on this continent. Few people seek out places to die. Anyone who knowingly walks into their death is a fool, especially if it's not for gold, but for some naive sense of protecting the weak.
I'd probably be called crazy.
He knew that even without being told. Yet, despite that, he couldn't turn his back. If he took a step back here, if he ignored this, he felt like he'd never be able to move forward again. He felt it in his bones.
Hey.
Have he survived this long because the goddess of luck took pity on him? But he doesn't think he's ever received a kiss from her, has he? If she was going to bless him, she could have given him a lot more luck. What a ridiculous thought. Drip, drip, whoosh. The rain started pouring down again.
Enki, you bastard.
The mercenary leader was angry. What he said next stuck with him for a long time.
They won't kill them. Even if we leave them, they won't die. Why would they kill such a large group? What would they gain by killing them? Are they perverts? They won't kill them. They'll probably just sell them to slavers. Being a slave would be better for them anyway.
Life in the swamp village wasn't exactly abundant, aside from the fact that they were alive. But he couldn't say being a slave would be better.
I was going to take you into our mercenary group, you idiot.
The leader backed off. There was no other choice. He wasn't someone he could drag along by beating him up, nor was it worth meddling that much. Moreover, Enkrid was just a guide who could swing a sword, not some extraordinary talent. He was just a fool who couldn't see an inch ahead.
Why?
The village chief asked with eyes full of disbelief. It was so absurd that he spoke before expressing any gratitude.
Do you see the third guy from the left of that group?
Yes, I see him.
That's my enemy.
In truth, it was the first time he'd ever seen him. At the mention of an enemy, the bandit blinked. He studied Enkrid's face. With a face like that, you wouldn't easily forget him.
Are you from the mining town, by any chance?
He didn't know what he was talking about, but he nodded.
Shit, so someone survived from there.
It seemed these guys had been wreaking havoc in more places than just here. If that's the case, then it wouldn't be a problem to kill them all. Enkrid might die before he managed to kill them all, but he had to steel his resolve and strengthen his determination.
Really?
The village chief whispered in his ear.
No, it was a joke.
Are you crazy?
Enkrid chuckled. Since he was going to fight anyway, what did the reason matter? The village chief was so taken aback that he didn't even think to stop the departing mercenaries.
That guy isn't our responsibility,
The mercenary leader said.
Is he really staying behind alone?
The bandit leader asked again. The mercenaries withdrew, but 2 of them turned back.
Damn it, kid. What the hell is wrong with you? Ger? I'm staying. I can't just leave this guy behind. If things get bad, I'll have to at least help him escape. You bastard. If that's the case, then I should be the one staying. Pete, you too? He's like a younger brother to me, so I'm worried.
The leader frowned. He also wanted to stay, but if they did, the whole mercenary group would be wiped out. The leader declared that only the 2 could stay, and anyone else who wanted to remain would have to leave the mercenary group. That was that. Ger and Pete. The 2 mercenaries stayed behind.
I'm older than you, you know.
When Enkrid mentioned this to Pete, the ugly, thick-eyed swordsman who liked children replied.
Based on looks, I'm much older than you.
Enkrid chuckled at that. Even though they had only known Enkrid for about a month, the 2 mercenaries couldn't bring themselves to turn away. Enkrid then drew his sword and stood in front of the bandits.
Mister, are you crazy?
The little girl, who would be lucky if she was sold into slavery, asked. She had noticed the way some of the bandits had been eyeing her like dogs eyeing a piece of meat.
Have you fallen for her, kid? It's proper to watch a man's fight.
Ger stepped forward and answered the girl's question with a quip.
Whatever.
The girl didn't even listen.
Halfway.
Enkrid casually responded to the girl's question about his sanity and raised his sword. It was indeed a crazy thing to do. What would he gain from protecting these people? Nothing. Would he receive a medal or something for this reckless behavior? Not a chance. The kingdom's nobles probably wouldn't even know this was happening. They were too busy filling their own bellies. Enkrid knew about the nobles too. What if the nearby lord were to be asked to send troops to deal with the bandits? Even if by some chance there was a virtuous lord willing to listen, it would only be after all the villagers had already been sold into slavery, killed, or left crippled. Besides, the local lord wasn't the kind of person who would send soldiers to hunt down bandits whose whereabouts were unknown. In conclusion, if they left, everyone would die. No one else would step in if Enkrid didn't.
We can sell that one too. She's a pretty one.
The bandit leader looked pleased. Enkrid fought back with everything he had. He managed to cut down 3 of them, but on the 4th he was struck in the head by a club, causing him to lose his balance. Ger and Pete fought like madmen too. Ger swung his axe with great force, while Pete thrust his long spear, piercing several bandits.
If you don't want to get captured, get your act together.
The village chief shouted bravely, but soon after, a throwing axe struck him in the head, killing him. Still, they fought on. Some of the villagers took up weapons. They charged with long poles and swung axes meant for chopping wood.
Throw!
The little girl, who dreamed of becoming an herbalist, also played her part. Along with children younger or slightly older than her, she picked up stones and threw them. It felt like they might have a chance. If luck was on their side, they might even get an opportunity to escape. What if the mercenary leader had a change of heart and launched a surprise attack? That didn't happen.
Fire.
Thwip, thwip, thwip. 10 archers fired, and Pete was killed by a single unlucky arrow that pierced his throat. Because of that, he never got to hear Pete's final words. Ger and Pete, did they not know they were going to die? They knew, but they still hoped for a reversal. Ger even had a plan. He had said that if he saw an opening just before the fight, he would take the bandit leader hostage. Ger was known for never losing in one-on-one combat, even among the mercenaries. It seemed plausible. Pete was quick with his hands and feet, darting around like lightning in battle. One would distract while the other captured the leader. That was the plan. It failed. The bandit leader was both strong and skilled. When Ger saw an opening and charged, the leader met his axe with a single sword swing. Sparks flew, and Ger's face twisted in frustration. The opponent's skill was far beyond what he had anticipated.
Shit.
Ger despaired. Pete, after holding out as long as he could, was struck in the neck by an arrow and went down first, snuffing out the last of their hope.
You bastards.
Ger made a final desperate charge.
Where do you think you're going?
The bandit leader was not caught off guard. He remained calm, directing his men to close in and maintain the encirclement. There was no escape. In the end, it happened just like that. Ger's head was severed by the bandit leader's sword.
Did you really think you could win? What were you hoping to accomplish?
Enkrid resisted until the end, but the leader choked him with his bare hands. He saw his sword, which had somehow slipped from his grip, lying in the muddy ground. He also noticed the little girl, who had fought until the end, her head smashed and blood pouring out.
She's dead, too.
Enkrid's mouth opened involuntarily, and the leader, following his gaze, responded.
She put up quite a fight. She bit and struggled even at the slightest touch.
The bandit's tone was nonchalant. It was a world of kill or be killed. This was just how things were.